Welcome into another video. The NFL draft is officially behind us. So, as every other ball nowhere does, I'm going to give you my draft grades. And today we are obviously going to be starting with the AFC South and the NFC South. We're going to be breaking down 8 teams, starting with the Tennessee Titans. And before I get started, I just got to say draft grades are pointless. They are. Draft grades should come out like 3 to 4 years after the fact of the draft because we could sit here and judge these prospects who have never played a down in the NFL. But in our defense, we have watched a lot of film on these guys. We really love some guys. We really don't like some guys. So I think it's also fair and fun to give out some draft grades. I know I'm a few days behind here, but I really wanted to dive deep into these grades and, get it right. So we're going to start off with the Tennessee Titans, who I gave an A- to. The Cam Ward pick, was a very obvious one. It was their biggest need. He was the best quarterback available. Hard to complain about that selection. And then moving on to their second pick, going with Alu Aladejo, edge. It is their second biggest need. Edge rusher was a massive need for them, but I thought Alu was more of a third round guy. I thought Landon Jackson, Princely, Mike Green, better players. I understand the Mike Green slip. A team like Tennessee maybe not wanting to take a risk on that. Didn't really knock them too hard for that. But I like Jackson more. I like Princely more. I thought this was a little bit of a reach. Still filling a massive need. Moving on to the third round, Kevin Winston Jr., phenomenal pickup. Great value. Round 2 guy, in my opinion. You got him in round 3. I preferred maybe Xavier Watts here. Can't complain. And then Shamir DK, good traits, athleticism, another big need. The Titans did a really good job at addressing their needs. I thought it was maybe a little early for DK here, but, 4th round, solid value. Elike Minor, good pick, really good value, lots of high upside. Easily their best day 3 pick. And then, I'm not going to go through all the selections, but rounds 5 through 7, I thought they had really good picks, really good depth. Mullings, I think, is a really good RB3 with a lot of special teams upside. So an A- for the Tennessee Titans. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, I gave them a B+. And a lot of that starts with the Travis Hunter selection. I gave that an A-. Now, Travis Hunter is an A+ player. You're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You need a quarterback. You need a wide receiver. Best player in the draft, but that haul is a lot. That's a large pay for a non-quarterback. I understand going up and get him. The only reason it's not an A+ is because of the trade. I thought it was a little much to go get somebody who is not playing quarterback. I like the Caleb Bransaw selection. He was the best cornerback available on my board. Revamped secondary, unreal athlete, and then I really loved the Wyatt Millam pick. Really, really good pick. I'm a big fan of Millam. Easily could have been a 2nd-round guy in my eyes, and I think this is a guy who's going to be competing for a day 1 job. I'm a big fan of Millam. And then moving on to Bishul Tutin, I think at 4.2, that's A+ value, but that's a C+ need. I understand that ETN is on a, contract year. You have Tanks Bigsby. We're talking at only 104. That's still technically a top 100 player. I'm going to be interested to see his usage. I am very high on Tutin. Like I said, I think it's good value. Don't understand the need there. And I thought Jack Kaiser was an absolute reach of a pick, not a major need. Pretty much anything after their 4th round is where I kind of, at least pretty much anything after Tutin is where I wasn't really a fan of. McLeod and Monheim are, solid, versatile additions. Lack of DL additions for depth was worrisome for me. I like LaQuint Allen in the 7th round, but I really don't understand that now he is your RB4 there. So B+ for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Moving on to the Colts, I also gave them a B+. Tyler Warren, was obviously a no-brainer selection for them. It is their biggest need, one of the top players in this class, day 1 impact guy. JT in the 2nd, I think that's a really good pick at pick 45. High production at Ohio State, national champion, another day 1 impact player. The Wally pick really dropped their score for me here. I believed Wally was available much later. This is no more, in my opinion, than a depth cornerback, especially at pick 80. Other needs were, more apparent here. Millam was available, who I just talked about to the Jaguars, and they go with a guy who I thought was probably a 5th-round pick, and Wally. Wasn't a big fan of that selection. I gave that a C, really dropping their score down. But Jalen Travis finally addressing the offensive line. I would have liked to see them do that earlier, but good depth over there. Giddens, really like Giddens. That's good value for Giddens. He was my RB11, drafted as RB15. He's got a lot of big play potential. And then Leonard, I love the developmental quarterback pick here. A room of Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson is not something to write home to mom about. So I like that. Solid 6th and 7th round guys as well. Alabama defensive tackle and a Wisconsin linebacker. Usually those guys end up at least having some impact. So B+ for the Colts. Wally, cornerback, really dropping their production there. Justin Wally, wasn't a big fan of his. I think they definitely would have snuck in with a better pick there into the A's. And then my last team for the AFC South is the Houston Texans, who I also gave a B+ to. Their first pick coming in at 34 was wide receiver Jaden Higgins. I gave that a B+. He was my wide receiver 7, drafted pretty high. You had wide receiver 1, 5, and 6 on the board. He is a good talent, though, reliable ex-receiver. I don't think it's an overdraft with these wide receivers. Obviously, these NFL boards are much different from mine. I thought, probably 1 through 7 of my list, which Higgins was 7, could have ended up being early second round guys. So not a horrible pick. I loved the Ariante Ursary pick, offensive tackle, 4 out of 5. Massive need for them. This is a guy who has the potential to sit and grow in year 1 as well, behind Trent Brown and Cam Robinson. He also could be a day 1 starter. That's how high I am on him. Really wanted the Bears to come away with him. They didn't. And then wrapping up their day 2 pick, Jalen Smith, not bad. I gave it a B-. He's got alignment versatility, which really works well in Houston. This is a guy who has reps at nickelback, safety, and the outside corner spot. He's got size, athleticism. Just the production doesn't jump off the page for round 3 for me. I thought it was a little bit high. Thought he was more of a day 3 guy overall. So I gave it a B-. I like the depth. They've got some really good ball players in their secondary over there. Petre, a guy that I think Jalen Smith could very well learn from. Singletary's over there as well. So they're going to be able to move him around, use him in different ways. Jalen Knoll, A pick. Love that kid. He was my wide receiver 5, or my wide receiver 6. I had him even higher rated than Higgins. So coming away with him at pick 79. I love the value there. I love the potential. Iowa State guys together. It's just a loaded room. Now you got Nico Collins there, Higgins there, Hutchinson. And I know Tank Dell's not going to be playing football this year. So kind of a surprising to go back-to-back wide receivers in 2 and 3, but not bad. Woody Marks, I gave a C. Marks isn't a bad runner, but he's not as good as Samson, Blue, Jordan James, Giddens. All of those guys were available. And you gave up a 2026 third-round pick. Woody Marks was, in my opinion, their worst selection. Was not a fan of that in any way, shape, or form. And then wrapping up in round 6 and 7, Jalen Reed, good pick, good depth piece. Luke Lackley, I think those are good value pieces, good future pieces there. Graham Mertz, that's a guy who should have went UDFA, in my opinion. I wonder why they did not draft Quinn Ewers there, but these 6th, 7th round quarterbacks, it's a crapshoot anyway. So overall, Houston Texans, B+. Now we are making my way into the NFC South, and we're going to be kicking it off with the Carolina Panthers, who I just gave a solid flat B to. Ted McMillan, I gave the selection a solid flat B as well. I like Ted McMillan. He was my wide receiver 2. I don't think he was a top 10 worthy player, and I thought they should have addressed edge rusher there. Jalen Walker, I think that was the move there for them. They are in desperate need of a true defensive player outside of Derek Brown and J.C. Horn, and I think Jalen Walker was just that for them. Like I said, I like Ted McMillan. I'm sure he's going to have, a solid career in Carolina, but I don't think he's a top 10 worthy player. Don't like the reach there. Nick Scourton, really good pick. This is really good value, good player, a very versatile in any scheme. I think that was a solid selection. And then double dipping here at edge and coming away with Princely. That's an A move for me as well. Good value, in my opinion, a 2nd round player coming away with in the 3rd round. Good stuff. This is where it kind of gets a little shaky. And this one, Trevor Etienne, in my opinion, really dropped their score. I gave that a C-. I don't understand that pick at all. They've already have a large running back room, and I think Etienne here was massively overpicked. Etienne probably brings something new to the room over there, but in my opinion, Hubbard, Brooks, I'm taking both of those guys ahead of him. I don't really understand this pick at 114, but I like the Lathan Rantham selection. I thought Jackson was a good depth inside. Jimmy Horn Jr. is a meh player to me, but has potential to grow. overall, a B for the Carolina Panthers. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints, I gave a B -2, kicking off with the Kelvin Banks Jr. pick. They declined Penning's fifth-year option. Fulaga had a really, shaky rookie year last year, and they're in need of an offensive tackle. Banks might have been the best available. He wasn't the best available for me, but in a lot of people's eyes, Banks was the pick there. So I gave that a solid A- selection for them. Really hated the Tyler Show pick. I'm not a fan of his at all. Picking him at 40, like, I get it. The Saints need a quarterback, but I didn't like that. I didn't like that one bit. The Vernon Broughton pick, I wasn't a big fan of. Bolstering up the trenches, not always a bad thing, but you have a glaring need at cornerback, and Azare Thomas, Siobhan Revel, both still on the board there. Much rather would have seen them go there. I'm not a big Vernon Broughton guy to begin with. So I wasn't a big fan of this pick. I think I gave that one a B- because, bolstering up the trenches, I can never really complain about. And then Jonas Sanker, I gave that a C. I don't mind his tape, but Watts and Bowman are still on the board. I think those are both huge misses for New Orleans. I liked Watts and Bowman much more. I like the Quincy Riley pick. Good upside, good cornerback, starter potential down the line. And then Devin Neal might have been my favorite pick for them in the 6th round. If I'm being honest, out of their entire board, Devin Neal in the 6th round was probably my favorite selection. Devin Neal isn't a, freak playmaker, but he's maybe one of the best pure runners in this draft class. Just a smart running back. So I love that selection for them. But other than that, wasn't really jumping off the page for me. Gave them a B-. The Atlanta Falcons, the second team, I handed an A- grade to. The Jalen Walker pick, I thought was a no-brainer there for them. Great selection, really good value consensusly, a massive need for them. The James Pierce Jr. trade, I only gave a B to. I did not like the idea of giving up a future first-round pick, moving into pick 26 for a red flag machine like James Pierce Jr. is. Kind of made me nauseous just looking at it, and I thought it was a phenomenal deal for the Rams. So the trade, it definitely makes that a B. Pierce, though, at 26, I like the value there. He has a very high ceiling. This was a guy who was projected to be the number 1 overall pick just last year. Obviously, red flags and a slip in production just this last season caused for his fall, but I like the pick overall. I like the selection at the 26, but giving up a future first-round pick, oh my God, it made me sick to my stomach. And then this is my first, I've only gone through, this is my first 5 out of 5 pick here. Xavier Watts at 96. I think this is an A+ pick. My safety number 3, unreal value. This is an easy early second rounder, in my opinion. Watts was at least mid second rounder, and then being able to get him at 96, I think, is unbelievable value. I love that for them. And then Billy Bowman Jr. at 118 was great value as well. He's a guy who can be transitioned into the slot, but I gave it a B+ just because it's like back-to-back safeties. I didn't really like it. You go back-to-back edges, back-to-back safeties. Your defense is now revamped. It's not the worst thing in the world, but wasn't the biggest fan. And then Jack Nelson in the 7th round. I love that for them. I thought he was a round 5 guy. Great draft by the Atlanta Falcons. The only reason they are not higher than an A- is just because they went edge, safety. They've got more needs than that. I would like to see them maybe address the interior. Grady Jarrett is gone. So overall, not a bad draft from the Atlanta Falcons. And then to finish this up, we are going to be going with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I gave a B+2. Starting off with the Emeka Egbuka selection. He is a top 20 player. I thought him going at 19, it really added up. He was my wide receiver 3, but there's just much more glaring holes that needed to be addressed here than wide receiver. You re-signed Chris Godwin for a reason. I know he's very injury prone and Mike Evans is old, but you also have Jalen McMillan there. Egbuka is going to be fighting for wide receiver 3. He also has the talent to come in and be the main guy, but then you just paid Chris Godwin. So I don't really like the value there or the need there for wide receiver, but I like the value. I think it's, fair value. I gave it a B+. Benjamin Morrison in the 2nd round, really good pick. I think Morrison is very NFL ready, good high ceiling, really good NFL size. It's just going to be interesting to see how that hip injury affects him. And then Jacob Parrish, not bad to double dip the secondary here, but no edge or LB at this selection at 84 really threw me off. I thought Josiah Stewart should have been a lock of a pick here. So this one really threw me off, going back-to-back corners. not the end of the world, but they ended up getting David Walker at 121. You know, he has really good pass rushing traits that Bulls can develop up here. So I'm a big fan of the David Walker selection here. That really gave them a boost. And then I thought, you know, they had solid rounds 5 through 7, wrapping up with 2 edge rushers total, 2 wide receivers total, 2 cornerbacks total. It's not bad, but you didn't address your linebacker depth or your offensive line depth here at all. That bothered me a little bit. Tez Johnson is nice, but you're talking about 7th round pick, probably wide receiver 5 or 6 over there now. So would have preferred to see some OL depth there, some linebacker depth. Overall, B+ for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that is going to wrap up today's video. We have 3 more regional divisions to wrap up here. Moving on, I think tomorrow we are going to be going with the AFC North and the NFC North. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another video. Make sure to leave a comment below on what you thought of my draft grades, a like. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate you guys. Nice to be back in the studio post-draft time, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.